Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Francine Schertzer, Senior Vice President of Politics and Policy at PCN, President of the Pennsylvania Press Club, and your host for today's luncheon. Joining me at the head table is Todd Eachus, Broadband Communications Association of Pennsylvania. Thank you for your support and thank you for being here. Today's luncheon is being taped and will be carried throughout Pennsylvania to the television and streaming audience of PCN. Our speaker today is Republican candidate for Pennsylvania Attorney General Dave Sunday. Dave is a top litigator, a United States Navy veteran, and a dynamic leader who put himself through college and law school while working at UPS. Dave leads an office of prosecutors and detectives who together investigate and prosecute approximately 9,000 criminal cases annually. After high school, Dave joined the Navy as an enlisted recruit and was deployed in the Persian Gulf, where he participated in Operation Desert Strike. Dave was also deployed to South America and conducted numerous counter-narcotics operations in the Caribbean. Dave received his undergraduate degree in finance from Penn State University in 2002 and graduated from Widener Law School in 2007. After graduation from law school, he worked as a law clerk for the Honorable Joseph C. Adams, former President Judge of the York County Court of Common Pleas. For the last 15 years, Dave has been a prosecutor with the York County District Attorney's Office, and prior to being sworn in and elected district attorney, served as the Chief Deputy Prosecutor of Litigation. In 2013, Dave was appointed by the United States Department of Justice as a Special Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Middle District of Pennsylvania, where he assisted in prosecuting gang, illegal gun, and drug cases in federal court. During this time, Dave led the prosecution of Operation Sunrise, a large-scale, multi-jurisdictional arrest and prosecution of over 100 members and affiliates of the Latin Kings, a violent criminal gang operating in York County. Dave is leading York County's fight against the heroin fentanyl epidemic. He and the York County coroner co-founded the York County Heroin Task Force, now the York County Opioid Collective, where Dave served as board chair. Dave protects our seniors throughout his role as Elder Abuse Task Force. In addition to conducting numerous scam prevention seminars throughout the county, Dave has successfully prosecuted scam artists targeting senior citizens. Dave is a career litigator and has personally tried approximately 50 felony jury trials to verdict, including the successful prosecutions of over 10 of the most high-profile York County murders in recent memory. In addition to homicides, Dave has successfully tried to verdict murder conspiracies, multiple attempted murders of police officers, multiple murders for hire, felony narcotics deliveries, a complex embezzlement, aggravated assaults, burglaries, armed robberies, bank robberies, insurance fraud cases, thefts, and elder fraud scams, to name a few. Beyond trial work, Dave is the immediate past president of the York County Bar Association and serves on the board of the York County Children's Advocacy Center. He also chairs the Education and Training Committee of the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association and was elected by his colleagues to the board of directors for both the PDAA and the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Institute. Also, Dave previously served on behalf of the PDAA on the Pennsylvania Commission for Crime and Delinquency's statewide Mental Health and Justice Advisory Committee. Nationally, Dave serves on the American Conservative Union's Prosecutor Advisory Board and has spoken across the country on effective public safety initiatives. Additionally, Dave is a founding member of the York Group Violence Initiative and now serves on the Governance Committee. In January of 2020, Dave was appointed by the Speaker of the House, Mike Turzai, to the Pennsylvania Commission on Sentencing and was subsequently reappointed by Speaker Brian Cutler. Dave is a member of the Pennsylvania Bar Association, American Legion, and the VFW. Dave lives with his wife and son in Spring Garden Township, York County. We'd like to welcome Dave Sunday.
Well, that was my entire speech. So I'm pretty close to it. No, it's great to be here with everyone. It's wonderful to see everybody. I've had a lot of questions walking in here this morning. For example, how do you feel right now with the campaign? And we have 1 week to go, a week and a day, so I feel great. But it is great to be here. So by way of background, I'm from central Pennsylvania. I was born here in Harrisburg. And when I was a kid, I was a little bit of a wayward youth. And we'll just kind of let that go. But I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I had no idea what I wanted to do with anything, really. And so I decided I was going to join the military. And I know there's some other veterans in here. And someone asked me when I was walking in why I decided to join the Navy. So I will share that with you. So by way of background, there's a little piece to this. So my father was a Marine, and then he became a school teacher. So my dad's a retired public school teacher. And so we'll put a pin in that. We'll come back to it. So back when 1994, when I decided to join the military, the way it was, and I don't know how many of you are from Harrisburg, but it used to be called the Point Mall over in Union Deposit. And on the second floor at the Point Mall, they had all of the recruiters in a row. And so you would go there and it's like shopping for your life. You would walk through each recruiter, and I started with the Coast Guard, and God bless the Coast Guard. For any Coasties watching, I love you dearly. And I went to talk to the Air Force recruiter. I then spoke to the Army recruiter. And then I ended up at the Marine recruiter. And I think, are there any Marines in here? Former Marines? Any? Okay. Well, there's probably some watching. But so I looked at the Marine recruiter, and we made eye contact, and he was a big guy, and he looked kind of tough. And so, like I told you, my dad was a Marine. And so I'm looking at this guy, we're looking at each other. And I want you to know I love my dad very dearly. However, I walked right past him. And I went to the Navy recruiter, and they started showing me pictures of what Navy life was like. And it was people playing beach volleyball and doing all kinds of things. And so I joined, but that's it. That's how I joined the Navy. So off I went. I was 18. I was a young man, and I was enlisted. So I was an E1 when I joined. So for those of you that don't know what that means, I was literally the lowest rank that existed. There was no rank lower than me. I was an E1. So I swabbed decks, and I chipped paint, and I did all that type of work. And to be honest, I really, really needed it. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made in my life, was joining the military. And so I was on a guided missile frigate, and we were deployed all throughout the world. We were in the Persian Gulf, as you heard, during Desert Strike. And I spent a lot of time in Central and South America doing counter-drug operations. And so when we were doing counter-drug operations, we boarded drug runner ships, and we tried to stop the drugs before they came back up here. And so that was my formative years. I came home. I started working at UPS here on 19th and Paxton Street. So some of you might be familiar with the UPS hub. So I started working there. I did my undergrad all day, and I worked at UPS at night for all 4 years. And then I worked at UPS during the day while I went to law school at night. And it was one of the most amazing experiences that I ever had. After that, I met my wife. So my wife is from Sri Lanka, which is a country far, far away. For those of you that drink tea, you probably know about Sri Lanka. So I worked there. I met my wife in Sri Lanka. I came home. I started as a law clerk for a judge, and then I went right into the DA's office. So I stayed there for 15 years. So for all my time in the DA's office, it was amazing. So for those of you that are familiar with York, and I'm sure some of you are, we're directly north of Baltimore. And so because we're directly north of Baltimore, we have a tremendous problem over the years with opioids. And so when I started in the office, I had no idea what to expect. And so I started out in a courtroom doing DUIs and everything in between, worked my way up through my time in the courtroom. I ran our major crimes unit, our felony drug unit. I was chief of litigation. And then I was one of our main homicide jury trial prosecutors. And so I probably have done over 20 first-degree murder jury trials. And so when you think about being a prosecutor, I can tell you right now that my life changed drastically when I started working on the opioid epidemic. And one of the main reasons why I'm running for Attorney General is because of the work that I've done with the opioid epidemic. So being directly north of Baltimore, and remember, Baltimore was the heroin capital of the United States. Because of that, we have a lot of we go back to, I'll say, 2014, the overdose death rate tripled in York County. And when it tripled, our DA actually assigned me to work on overdoses. And so remember, in law school, nobody teaches you about the opioid epidemic. They don't teach you about substance abuse. They don't teach you about mental health or anything like that. And so I started out with our county coroner, Pam Gay. And what we did was we went through all of York County, and we had probably over 200 town hall meetings where we met with families. We sat in living rooms with parents who've lost their children, and we did everything in between really to understand what was going on. And what we discovered was there was an epidemic that was destroying our community. It was destroying families. This is back before the lawsuits. This is before it was in the news every day, so no one really knew about it. And when I saw this happening, we really it just changed my life. There were children there were parents during this time period that didn't want to tell us that their children were addicted. And so what we did was we hit this head on. And I told you about my time, spending my time in the courtroom being a prosecutor, and that's really, really important. But at the same time, we realized we need to do everything we could to help children that are in addiction. And so not only do we hammer drug traffickers, but at the same time, we did everything we could to help get people into treatment. And so what we did was we started this heroin task force that ultimately became a nonprofit called the York Opioid Collaborative, where we work every day with parents who've lost their children. We work with the faith-based community. We work with our local hospital, our medical, our regional healthcare provider, WellSpan, on a lot of different things. We work with the police. We work with everyone. And what we do is we help get people into treatment. And so we've been able to lower our overdose death rate by 26%, whereas it's gone up 15% around the rest of the state. And during this whole time period, when we took a dive into the opioid epidemic, we realized very quickly that not only did we have an epidemic with substance abuse, but we have a severe mental health crisis in Pennsylvania. And our prisons have become de facto warehouses, in a way, for people with severe mental illness. And so we were like, God, if we want to lower crime, we have to do what we can to impact substance abuse and mental health. And so, I know there's a former prosecutor in the room here. I'm not sure if there's any others, but, it's very, very, I'm not going to say easy, but we are very good at putting people in jail and convicting people. But at the end of the day, when we look at our community and we realize how important it is that people are safe, we have to do what we can to hold people accountable. But what I also say is redemption. Accountability and redemption is the key to safe communities. And so, first of all, we talked about the opioid epidemic, the mental health crisis. We partnered with WellSpan, and I want to talk about this here for a second because this is really important. When you look across Pennsylvania and you look at the crime in PA, about 70%, I would say, of all the crime in Pennsylvania is either directly or tangentially related to either substance abuse, mental health, or a combination of the two. And so not only if we want to make our community safer, we have to impact that, but at the same time, I feel that we have a moral responsibility to help people with mental illness get treatment. And so what we did, and some of you may be familiar with this, but a lot of times you'll see the police will get a call, it's a mental health call. And they'll say there's someone, I actually saw one not too long ago, right in front of the courthouse in York, where I was driving into the office, and a guy was in a wheelchair. He got up out of the wheelchair, and he kind of tossed it into the street. And so when he did that, obviously that person, did he really commit a crime? He threw a wheelchair into the street, but the police came. And what happened was they would go ahead and the police would interact with this individual. And then with that, a co-responder would come up. And that person is a trained mental health professional. And so the police officer makes sure that this person's okay, that it's safe, that this person's not going to commit crimes. And then they bring the mental health person in, they connect with this individual, and they essentially do what's called a warm handoff to treatment. This isn't a situation where you're letting people go from committing crimes or anything like that. This is a situation where you are helping people get into mental health treatment. And this is really important because when you look at police, like right now, we have finite resources with regard to law enforcement. I mean, people don't want to be police officers right now. We have a terrible time trying to get people to be prosecutors, to work with children, youth and family, probation, parole. And so all of these jobs, these fundamental jobs in our society, we're having a tough time getting people to want to do those anymore. And so when you go back to the mental health crisis, okay, this is a situation where you get someone treatment and it allows a police officer to go back on the street and get the bad guys. So there's mental health and with these mental health initiatives, and this can be done all over Pennsylvania. And as Attorney General, I will do everything I can to make sure that these initiatives take place all over Pennsylvania. But of the last 1,000 mental health calls, only 4 people became incarcerated. And when you think about that, that's important not only for obviously for that individual and their families, but at the same time, it is unbelievably important for public safety. And it also saves that police officer and it lets him to go get other things. Now, there's a third part of this that I always talk about. And I shared that I worked at UPS. And when I did work at UPS, I worked with a lot of men and women who, just some of the hardest workers you could ever imagine in your life. Some people were on probation, parole, some were on work release. And one of the, I always talk about my background going, working in the military and then working at UPS. And I will tell you guys, like when I went through that, I didn't know what the impact of like that would be on my life, like what that path would be. And when I first became a lawyer, like I always felt that I was behind because, it just didn't seem like your traditional attorney path, right? I'm a guy who, I swabbed decks and chipped paint, and then I worked at UPS. And how would that impact me in my legal career? It was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. It was the greatest blessing in my life because I understand what normal people go through, because I am one. I understand what that's like. And life is really hard for a lot of people, okay? And so to that point, I remembered watching people, including myself, maybe I'm projecting here, but watching people at UPS that worked and they made their way up and they got promoted and they made money and they saved money and they got a college degree. And you could see the pride in people, and I never forgot that. And so turning back to the people that are coming out of prison, 95% of everyone we put in jail is coming back out. 95%. And so if we really want to have a safer community, those are the people, we don't want them to commit more crimes. Because that is a huge group of people that we want to be safe. We want them to work, to be employed, to take care of their families, pay their taxes, pay their restitution, and do everything that we would expect citizens to do. And so we started this entire reentry program where we went to employers in the community, we went to manufacturers, anyone that would think about it. We did everything we could to help individuals, and we're doing it right now. We actually just opened a reentry opportunity center in our prison where people can go through that process before they come out of jail, and where they hopefully can start doing job interviews and things of that nature. And so Harley Davidson is a second chance hire for us. There's a lot of people that really believe in this. And so through all of this, we were able to lower our crime rate in York County by 41% since the 10-year high. And then we took those resources and we took them into our community and we went after the violent crime. And I will tell you that, amazing things happen when you work as a team. It's really amazing what can happen. And so we got together as a team, and some of you may have heard about this that live in the area here, but the Group Violence Initiative is something that started in 2016, and we just went all in. And so through that, we were able to lower our homicide rate in the city of York by 75%. 75% from 2022 to 23. We lowered our gang gun violence rate by 80% during that same time period. Those are unbelievably powerful numbers, and what's more important is those are lives that were saved. My son is in 4th grade, and I love him very dearly, and the hardest part of this campaign for me has been being away from him and my family. Anyone that tells you it's easy to do that, I don't even know where they're coming from, because it's unbelievably hard. But as a prosecutor, I've seen behind the curtain on what lurks out there. It is an unbelievably dangerous world right now. For children in particular. And when we were kids, and I'm not saying this happened to anyone in here, but when we were kids, if you had a little extra to drink, if you had a rough, Dennis doesn't know what I'm talking about. If this happened, you might have a hangover and not feel well for a day, right? But in today's world, the margin for error for children is next to zero. And we have seen kids die from one mistake. This is a very real thing. Fentanyl is in everything. We've seen people I was with someone the other night who told me that their nephew smoked marijuana that was laced with fentanyl and died. And so when you think about that, when you think about the internet, when you think about the dark web, when you think about everything where people are trying to get to our children every day through gaming systems, through social media, I firmly believe that if our community is not safe, nothing else matters. And that is why I'm running for Attorney General. Because I know that with regard to society and our children and our families, if something happens where someone dies, you can't fix that. That's not something that can be fixed. That's why that's why I'm so passionate about this. That's why I take this so unbelievably seriously. I mean, for me, this is mission-based. So I'm running for AG because I feel that it's mission-based with regard to public safety, and this is something that needs to happen. Like, I'm not running for a title. I'm not running for a different title. I'm running to do this job. I'm the chief prosecutor of a county running to be the state's top prosecutor. And so that's what brings me here with you guys today. I want to say it was kind of funny, through this process, because you never quite know, a few people in here maybe have run for statewide office, but you just don't really know what it's like until you do it. And it's kind of funny because, someone asked me recently, they're like, what, how do you feel about like running? How does it feel like running, right? And I will tell you guys, I am starting to feel like I've been doing this a little too long. There's no doubt. And I'm going to tell you, one of the big tells was about a week ago. So my mom, and I love her dearly, God bless her. My mom, she called me and she said, David, my wife, so my mom and I talk like once or twice a day. I've been made fun of it. My wife doesn't. She loves that happens. But anyway, so my mom called and she was like, David, she's like, I'm just so proud of you. I'm going to donate to your campaign. And I'm like, all right, let's go, And so she said, I'm going to go online right now. She's like, and I'm going to put $25 into your race, And I'm like, oh. I'm like, well, Mom, you know what? If you can do 25, I know you can do 50. Let's go, right? So, and that's when I knew. I was like, uh-oh, something's happening here. We need to land this plane. So, no, that's a very true story. But it's an honor to be here with everybody. I can't tell you how grateful I am. I mean, I think that and just because we're coming to the end of this campaign, I will take a moment just to share that we have a very volatile political world we live in, and I know that there's no one here that would disagree with that. I will tell you, though, that on the campaign trail, I have met and spent time with just so many people who just want to live their lives and be successful and have their children live in safety. And I think there is a lot out here, a lot that really that unites us as a country. I am the eternal optimist, and if I've remained that after doing this for a year and a half, then I think we're in a good place. But I truly am just grateful for being part of this process. I mean, it's humbling, and I'm grateful to be here. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it. That's it, right? Yep.
We have some questions from the audience.
Yeah.
York has a troubled history of racial tension. What have you done to improve the situation?
Okay. So York City, and I'm not sure if you guys know about this, there's the 1969 race riots occurred in New York City. So I know, a lot of you probably are familiar with that. If you're not, Google it, take a look at it. And so, unfortunately, that's been something that has sort of hung over York. What I can tell you is this. One of the blessings of running for AG with my background has been that I come to this place not through like transactional politics, but I come to this place through a courtroom. And for those of you that have ever been in a courtroom, you know that the courthouses are really, just the ecosystem of your community. It shows, everybody comes through there. There's no politics in a courthouse. And as the years have gone on, and we looked in particular at gang violence, we've done a lot of work, and this is really important. There's a lot of trauma that has occurred for children as a result of violence around them. And it's not just violence, but it's also trauma that has occurred as a result of just society generally, the opioid epidemic, seeing parents overdose, and having to, we've had children that have to call 911 for parents that have overdosed. And at the same time, when you're in a community where there is so much trauma, you have to find a way to work through it. And it was so important to us, especially in 2020, I'm sure most of you remember 2020, we really wanted to be a community that stood apart. And so what we did was we spend so much time in our community to understand like what the issues are that people are facing, how they feel about things. This question goes bigger than race relations. There's a thing called so in the criminal law there's a concept called procedural justice, and what that means very simply is that when people understand why you do what you do, they're far more likely to accept outcomes. And so we really embrace that, and we have this entire program where it's the police chiefs, the DA, and our black ministers in York City. And we spend a lot of time together. We talk about issues. We have worked through unbelievably difficult problems to find a mutual understanding, explaining why we do what we do, them explaining, why the community reacts certain ways to things. And those, those relationships that started out of necessity have grown into just amazing friendships. And we've been at this now for 5 or 6 years. And so to that point, we've discovered, and one of the things we did in 2020 in particular was, and I can't claim that it was totally my idea, because my good friend who is now a judge in Bucks County, Matt Weintraub, when he was the DA in Bucks County, he did this, where he brought in this documentarian, and they watched this documentary called Walking While Black. And it's the whole purpose of it is to facilitate like very serious conversations between police and communities. And so we brought that into the Strand Theater in York, and the Appel Center, and we put it up, and we brought police and police chiefs and prosecutors and members of the community. We didn't make a lot of fanfare about this, and we did it, and we watched a documentary. It's a very, very moving documentary, and its whole purpose is really to elicit that type of conversation. And so we watched it, and we had a very serious conversation. And so the takeaway, I think, very simply, is you have to talk to people. You have to understand where people come from. One of the worst things you can ever do in this world is tell someone they don't matter. If you tell someone that they don't matter and their opinion doesn't matter, then you're in deep trouble, because that is a horrific way, especially as a public servant, to go about your job. And so everybody's opinion matters, everyone's voice matters. And I think very simply what we did, and what I will do as Attorney General, is continue to have those conversations, even on a broader scope. And so really it's treating everyone with respect, listening to them, and understanding their opinions. So that's my answer.
Besides experience, what is the biggest difference between you and your opponent, Eugene DePasquale?
Well, I think that, so besides experience, because experience is a really big part of it, and what I will say is that, with all respect to my opponent, because this, I think we need to be at a place in society where we're not demeaning each other personally. So with all respect to him as a candidate, what I will say is, when you're in a leadership position, and I know there's a lot of leaders in this room, when you're in a leadership position, you always fall back on your experience. Like, what got you here, right? Like, so, who are, and this isn't, this is Attorney General, but it's also in other types of government, in corporate America, in different places. You fall back on your experience that you had in your life. And so, I talk about my experience a lot, so people understand the path that brought me there. And so I fall back on, being a guy who, wasn't quite on the right path as a child, as a young man, who joined the military, served overseas, worked at UPS through college and law school, prosecutor for 15 years. In addition to that, ran for DA twice, federal prosecutor. And so I come to this place right here with you guys through that path of being a prosecutor in a courtroom, of applying the facts to the law, of making sure that, there's no transactions in what we do. What we do is based on the law, the facts, and the circumstances. So that, my opponent, he comes to this place through politics. And that's a really important distinction, because, when you work your way to a point through politics, through elected office after elected office after elected office after elected office, and you have relied on transactional politics to get you where you're at, then that is the foundation from which you will lean upon when you are making really, really tough decisions. And that, again, I'm saying this through the lens of respect for my opponent. It's just, we're just different people. It's like a tale of two lawyers. And so you have one who came through the courthouse to get here, and the other who came through Harrisburg at a lot of different places. And I love Harrisburg. I just want to make that clear. But those are two vastly different people. They are. And so I am very proud of the path that I took. For me, again, there's, and you guys know this, there's very complex civil things, actions, there's different things that happen in the AG's office that are really, really important, and they do impact a lot of people. At the same time, when you talk about public safety and you talk about the opioid epidemic, you can't fix when someone dies. And so when I talk about the fact that if our community's not safe, nothing else matters, it's through that lens. And the Attorney General, being the state's top prosecutor, with hundreds of prosecutors and important work that can be done in that world. I mean, if you even think about, public safety, it impacts our schools, it impacts the business community, it impacts our economic environment, it impacts the way we treat each other, it impacts just the entire world around us, and I think that we're at a place where we need a prosecutor to do that job. So that's my answer.
If Pennsylvania law changed to prohibit abortion, would you enforce it?
If Pennsylvania law changed. So to begin with, by way of background, everyone in here should know that the abortion laws in Pennsylvania, and I always want to repeat this because it's some people, believe it or not, are confused with this. So in Pennsylvania, abortion's legal through the first 6 months of pregnancy. And then after that, there are exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. And as the Attorney General, I absolutely, without question, would enforce and defend that law, period. With regard to what if it changed, I mean, the reality is, and I also want to say something because this is very important because it has been misstated repeatedly by my opponent, repeatedly, that there is no set of circumstances that exist where I would ever prosecute a woman for getting an abortion. It would never happen, and that is one thing that I want to say since since everyone's here, but that is really important for people to understand that. I feel very strongly that Pennsylvanians, when we talk about the role of the Attorney General, it's important for people to recognize that, and I feel very strongly about this, that we have an entire legislative process that occurs in Pennsylvania. And all of our statutes are the will of the people as exhibited through the ballot box. And so we have almost 13 million Pennsylvanians. And the will of those 13 million Pennsylvanians elects their state reps, your state senators. It's that will that results in our statutes, our legislation in Pennsylvania. And I don't see any world that exists where the will of the people in Pennsylvania would ever do that. And I think that's something important to discuss. And, we have over 150,000 statutes and laws in Pennsylvania. And so to start throwing hypotheticals out, it's something that I just think is counterproductive, and I don't think it's good. I can tell you right now, very simply, that there is no world that exists that I could ever see where that would happen. And I can tell you that as a prosecutor, there's no world that exists where I would ever prosecute a woman for having an abortion.
Is it time for local law enforcement to have radar for speed detection and highway safety?
Pass.
How do you plan to protect the environment?
So as a DA, we work hand in hand with the Attorney General's office all the time. So the way it works is the Attorney General's office has an environmental crime unit. And all the DAs, are 67 DAs in Pennsylvania, 66 of which are part of our association, the District Attorneys Association. And so what happens is we typically get complaints that come into the DA's office. We get the complaints, and then the Attorney General's office has the expertise to prosecute a lot of these cases. And so when we get the cases, oftentimes we will send it to the Attorney General's office to handle, or we will collaborate on them together. I think that we absolutely must protect the environment. I think that, I grew up outside fishing, and I think that Pennsylvanians, the environment is something that is really important to Pennsylvanians. It's enshrined in our state constitution that to have clean water and clean air. And so I will do everything in my power as the Attorney General to make sure that I apply the facts to the law and enforce the laws as are written to keep our environment safe.
Two-part question here. What are your thoughts on Pennsylvania's medical marijuana program? And how about expungement of criminal records for marijuana arrests?
So I'm going to take those in reverse order. So when I talk about accountability and redemption, and this is something that is very important to me, I've never deviated from this in my entire campaign as being why I'm running and my theory of criminal justice. You have to have accountability and also redemption. When you talk about the redemption side of that, there's multiple parts. And you can't have one without the other, meaning like you can't redeem the world if they're not held accountable. And so one of the ways that redemption can occur for people is actually through the pardon process. And so, there are some people in Pennsylvania who, based on the crime, based on the time that has passed, based on not having an impact on victims and things of that nature, where pardons are something that occurs. In particular, we've seen a lot with regard to small amount of marijuana arrests from a decade ago, 20 years ago. And my office is one of the first DA's office in Pennsylvania to participate in the Pardon Project. And so the whole purpose of that is to put us in a position where we can help screen pardon applications, quite frankly, to not waste people's time in which a pardon would never be appropriate in a million years. And at the same time, for people that it might be appropriate, to kind of help streamline that so that they can get a pardon. Because when we talk about accountability, we talk about how critical it is that people work for society. You guys know I could talk about my reentry programming for the next 2 days, but we won't do that. And so to that point, as we walk backwards through, you have your pardons, but then we also have the impact of these small amount of marijuana arrests on citizens where it's not pardoned. One of the things that I've done is I've served for 4 years on the state sentencing commission. And in that capacity, we just put out the 8th edition sentencing guidelines. And those guidelines, this was clearly a bipartisan process. It was a robust process with testimony all over the state that went on for years. And one of the things that we did was we created sentencing guidelines where crimes that occur long in people's past have less of an impact on what the sentencing recommendation is. And the sentencing recommendation falls more heavily on the side of the current offenses that occur and on violent crimes and things of that nature. And so to that point, we've set a structure up right now where we are doing everything we can to minimize that. I mean, with regard to expunging them from people's records, I mean, if a certain amount of time goes by and someone hasn't committed crimes, I mean, in a lot of cases, they're actually would qualify for a pardon. And so, I'm a huge believer in second chances. I'm a huge believer in laws that would put people in a position where they could work. And so I would have to see the actual legislation for that, to be honest, before I would comment on it. But fundamentally, I believe that once people are held accountable, it's important to put them in a position where they can live their life and be safe and be thriving members of society.
Would you have done anything different from Attorney General Josh Shapiro amidst claims of the stolen election by Donald Trump? And how concerned are you that this will be a repeat in 2024?
Well, with regard to what he did or didn't do, I mean, I'm not really even going to go into that because so when you look at the 2020 election to begin with, as a DA, I was elected DA through that. And so what a lot of people don't understand is the vast majority of election issues come up in the local arena. And so what happens is, people will go online and they'll fill out maybe an election complaint, and that complaint will come to the local DA. They get those emails. So people that emailed the Department of State, those emails are forwarded directly to the DAs. And so through that process, I set up a system where we had county detectives that would review these things when they would come in. And so they would come in, someone would review them. If it was administrative, it would go to the election board. If it came to us and it was criminal in nature, then we would investigate it. I mean, we investigated, a lot of them. And so that was the process that we put in place. And, and so to that point, and that was a two-part question, right? What was the second part was, what would turning to this current election?
Your thoughts on the medical marijuana program?
No, I mean, about the election.
Oh, sorry. How concerned are you that there will be a repeat in 2024? Claims of election fraud.
Okay, so medical marijuana, and we'll come back to that. Medical marijuana, I'm a firm, I am a trial lawyer. And so, no, medical marijuana has a really important place in society. I know that, we really haven't seen many negative issues come up from that. I mean, for lack of a better way to put it. So I think it's going well. I think obviously there's probably some tweaks that could occur, but I would hesitate to stand here and just tell you how I feel about it without sitting down with local police, without sitting down with the medical marijuana board and everybody to have that type of conversation. But, with regard to this upcoming election, my position has never changed on this, even going back to 2020. And so in 2020, I put out a public service announcement, and you can Google it, you can find it, where the police chiefs in York County and I looked directly at a camera, and we said, listen, it doesn't matter who you support, it doesn't matter who you want to win, it doesn't matter if your person wins or loses, but we expect everyone to behave appropriately, we expect everyone to treat each other with respect, and if that doesn't happen, then we're going to hold you accountable. When we look, I think, there's no world that exists where our elections aren't the most fundamental, basic building block of our democracy. And, am I concerned? I guess we'll just have to all watch it happen together. But at the end of the day, regardless of who wins or loses, the other side has to accept it, and we have to move on, period.
We'd like to thank Dave Sunday and wish him well. We have some mementos for him. These gifts are compliments of PCN and the Pennsylvania Press Club. In closing, we want to thank you for being with us. Our next luncheon is the last one of the year, Monday, November 27th. For scheduling information, visit our website, papressclub.org. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.